yesterday and off today, of course. But we have gotten ready for the primary and the opening of absentee ballots. Now, absentee ballots have until July 5th to come in. They had to be postmarked on Election Day, but they have until July 5th. And we've since gotten all the affidavit ballots from the absentee election, gotten those together. We've been continually canvassing ballots as they come in as per the new law that was passed last year. But canvassing means that we open the envelope, we make sure that the envelope has everything on it. It needs to be a properly cast ballot. Cure it. If not, then we open the envelope, separate the ballot from the envelope, and put it face down into a sealed container. And then we count those or tabulate those on July 6th, because on July 5th is the last day for absentee ballots to be able to come in for this election. So we are going to tabulate those, and then we will certify the results of that election on July 7th, and then proceed to a hand count on July 10th if any races are close enough. And there's really only 2 races that even fall within the absentee ballot margin. And it's not a guarantee that either one of these races will go to a hand count. The races are the school board race for City of Syracuse Elections Commissioner, Education Commissioner. There's about 180 or so absentee and affidavit ballots that have already been received and have not yet been counted, and there's about 70 vote margin. Then the 4th District Common Council actually fell back within the absentee ballot margin after we collected all of the affidavit ballots, and those it's about just a couple more absentee ballots than there are a margin. So it's a much harder victory. I think it's like 60 or so absentee ballots and affidavit ballots and around 40 vote margin there. So it's much harder for that one to make up. Right now the school board race is within the barely within the hand count margin. That's 0.5% between the 4th and 5th place would trigger a hand count. So we'll have to see what those 183 ballots do, if it moves the needle at all, and if it makes it either more likely for a hand count or less likely, or closer to the hand count margin or away from it. That's really what we're going to have to see how those happen on July 6th. So that's what's going on with the primary election. But now I want to get into election legislation. So the New York State Legislature finished its session in June of 2023. And as those of you who don't know, while the legislature is a full-time job, they only have session, or is where they pass laws for the first 6 months of the year. And then the rest of the time is constituent service and actually drafting of laws and coming up with new laws that they want to pass for the next session. So now when I talk about any of these laws, I want to be very clear. None of these are an endorsement, but that being said, they are the law. So anything that is actually, passed by the legislature and then signed by the governor, elections commissioners throughout Onondaga County throughout New York State are obligated to enforce those laws. So the time for endorsement and advocating for or against laws have all but passed, except for this governor is going to sign some of these laws, and she hasn't signed them yet. There's about 16 or so ballots that have, there's like 7 bills that have already been signed by the governor that were passed in this session. And then there are another, looks like 16 pieces of legislation that have passed both houses, but have not actually been signed by the governor yet. And then there's a whole bunch of bills that passed one house. not going to talk about the bills that passed one house because that doesn't matter. I will talk about the bills that have been signed by the governor and the bills that will likely be signed by the governor. So 23 different laws were passed, some of them consequential, some of them more ministerial, by the legislature, and 7 of those have already been signed by the governor. And so I have a nice list here prepared by the New York State Board of Elections that is given out to all the elections commissioners. So kudos to you, State Board of Elections, for helping us keep this straight. And I've just decided to, let you know about all the bills. So the first 7 bills I'm going to talk about are the ones that have already been signed by the governor. They've already are law and will go into effect. So the first bill was, and I'm going to give you numbers, and I'll throw up a list on my website on the show notes for this commissioner in a car. A985 and S822. When it starts with an A, it means it's the Assembly version. When it starts with an S, it's the Senate version. They're both the same, but they have 2 different bill numbers. This bill was already passed and actually already went into effect. It allowed for boards of elections to electronically notify objectors and candidates about their petition objections. This was an important bill because the mail can be a little slow, and a lot of times there's not a lot of time to act if you have an objection in and you want to defend it. So this allowed us to do electronic processing of correspondence to get it to the people right away. The next bill, A605 S852. This has to do with the accessibility of congressional, senatorial, assembly, and election district maps, otherwise known as the shapefiles. These shapefiles are very important for people who want to do get out the vote work or mapping of elections and all of that. So for the first time, boards of elections have to have shapefiles of their election districts and their political subdivisions on their website, and that went into effect on May 22nd of 2023. Next one was A2556 S615. This bill ensured that the current contribution limits for all offices other than statewide Senate and Assembly will continue upon the commencement of the public financing program on November 9th. That it was effective immediately, and it just basically said that the contribution limits that are already in place are going to be in place for the public campaign finance program. A972 S1327. This actually, it conformed legislation relating to the 10-day voter registration change from last year. This is a technical bill. It basically made certain parts of election law that were in conflict with the bill that got passed last year that moved the voter registration down from 10 days. It just brought that into compliance. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That was effective immediately. The next bill, A5057 and S5818A. This has to do with the dates of designating petition filing to allow the observance of a Jewish candidate and the staff to file with interfering with Passover. This was a bill that was effective immediately, but also is already come and gone. This allowed for the extension of the designating petition back in April because of the Jewish holiday of Passover. It allowed for the extension of the filing of that, not the passing of signatures. And it was only for last year, so it's already done. Budget capital projects, $15 million in capital funds. This is A3004D and S4004D. This was done in the budget portion of the legislature session. If you remember, budget was delayed quite a bit, but this was a big deal. $15 million for local county boards to have to buy capital projects with. Big deal. It's going to help out a lot of boards that are upgrading their equipment this year. And that was one thing that I personally fought for a lot. I wanted 20 million, 10 in capital, 10 in operational. We got 50 million in capital. We'll take it. And then finally, for the bills that have been signed by the governor, the assembly district lines A6586 and S6454. If you may remember, there was a lawsuit about the assembly districts drawn last year, and they had to go back through the Independent Redistricting Commission. Well, independent, I'm using air quotes for those of you listening to me on audio, because I hate that they call themselves that, since they are political appointees. They are not independent. But it established all 150 assembly districts. This was passed with an overwhelming bipartisan measure, and the assembly districts that are now in place will be in place for the rest of the session. So those are ones that were passed by and already signed by the governor. Here are bills that are yet to be signed by the governor, but were passed by both houses, the Senate and the Assembly. And now, you shouldn't take any comfort or inference that if the governor hasn't already signed one of these bills, doesn't mean that she's not going to sign the bill. Often the governors will wait many, many weeks, many, many months after the session to sign bills. They have until the end of the year to sign some of these bills. And what happens is the governor has to call the bill up. And then once the governor calls the bill up, they have 10 days or so to sign it. Now, the legislature could send the bill to the governor too and start that 10-day clock, but they often do not do that. The only time I ever remember them doing that was without the governor, calling it up first, was the 2019 first day of session where they passed early voting. They were so excited to get that into place, and also there was not a lot of time. Since they wanted to put it in that year, that they sent it up without waiting for the governor. So there's 16 bills here that I'm going to go over. Again, just because the governor hasn't signed it doesn't mean that she's not. More than likely, she will sign all of these, but we'll have to see what happens. So first, A4072 S945. This bill makes amends the election law to have a conforming change in the process for canvassing absentee, military, special, and affidavit ballots in order to obtain the results of an election in a more expedited manner and ensure that every valid vote by a qualified voter is counted. This will make it a little bit easier to count those military ballots as they come in, like we do with other special and affidavit ballots. It's mostly a technical law, and once it is signed, it will be effective immediately. It has not been signed yet, but I think one of the things is that it got passed by the Assembly on April 17th, and sometimes the governor doesn't want to get in the middle of an election that's already happening, so she may sign that over the summer. We'll have to see how that goes. Another bill that is an election bill, A5180A and S1733A. This requires local boards of elections, BOCES, and charter schools and non-public schools to adopt policies to promote student voter registration and pre-registration, including procedures for providing access to voter registration and pre-registration applications during the school year and assistance with filling such applications and informing the students of the state requirements for voter registration. Right now, the schools are not required to do this, although many boards of elections do send out the forms to all the schools, but there's no coordinated effort. If this gets signed, then it will require boards of elections to work with schools more closely. And hopefully, I can tell you, I've tried to work with a lot of schools on this, and there hasn't been a lot of coordination when it comes to student voter registration. So if this gets signed, then we'll have to start working with our schools to come up with how we can do this. This is, next one is A5477A S5781. This is exempting poll workers from having to pay state income tax on their poll workers, not federal, State legislature cannot, you know, cannot, tell the federal government to do, but we can exempt this from New York state taxes. And this bill, if it's signed by the governor, will do such. It has not been signed yet. So any of you people that got paid for the primary, you may have to pay taxes on that. We'll have to see when the governor signs that. The next one is A928 and S438. This is a bill that would require the presidential electors in New York to vote for the will of the people, and they can't be what's called a faithless elector. This is we saw this happen in the 2020 election where some electors were saying that they weren't going to vote for a certain candidate. We saw it in the 2016 election as well. This requires any elector for the Electoral College that is from New York to vote for the winner of the popular vote in New York. So that bill was passed. Next bill, A1722B S1381A. This is an interesting bill because it requires any amendment to the Constitution or other question provided by law to be submitted to a statewide vote, be submitted to the people for their approval in plain language, which is deemed to be no higher than 8th grade reading level. So what this does is that it kind of puts in plain English what people are voting on with these constitutional law. A lot of these, constitutional amendments in the past are worded in a way that the average person may not know what they're voting on. So this is an important bill. A lot of people are going to get hung up on the 8th grade reading level thing. 8th grade reading level is actually pretty sophisticated reading, and most constitutional amendments are going to be able to be dumbed into this 8th grade reading level, so more people know what they're voting on. So we'll have to see that. Now, this next bill, A7690 S7550, the purpose of the bill was to set the presidential primary for 2024. Every 4 years, we have to set our presidential primary. We set it to April 2nd. But there's a lot of other things in this bill that it does. Some of those are things that the bipartisan elections commissioners wanted, such as the hand count. Putting into law that the hand count doesn't start until after the final canvass of absentees. That was something that came up in our hand count last year, where some judges were trying to get us to start hand counts before the final canvass of absentees, which is nearly impossible task and very confusing. So this makes it clear that the hand count comes after that. It also makes into law some things on the absentee ballots for postmarks. Right now, if an absentee ballot comes in after Election Day and has no postmark, if it comes in the day after Election Day, it's counted. If it comes in after that, it's not counted. But this allows for, if this bill gets signed, this allows for us to do what's called a cure, which we will send out a cure and notice to the voter saying, hey, what date did you send this absentee in? And then they get to, because it's not their fault that the postmark didn't get put on there. And this will allow them to count those ballots. We are actually under a court order or a court settlement to do this in the last federal election. So this is actually putting into law what that settlement was. So it'll be effective for this year and beyond. There's a few other things in here. There's a lot of technical stuff in here in that bill. There's a lot of things they put into this bill. But a lot of it is, ministerial stuff, like, clarifying when absentee ballots and affidavits are going to be filed. A lot of, ministerial stuff to make other parts of the law all talk in the same, because a lot of times when a law is changed, it affects other parts of the law that we weren't, aware of when it got changed. So sometimes they put in these little ministerial things as well. So that's that bill. Next bill, A4 282B S505B. This is what's been referred to as the even year bill. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've spent a lot of time on this and talking about how it moves some local elections to even years starting in 2026. Again, passed by both houses, not signed yet by the governor, and it won't take effect until 2026. Well, actually, it takes effect in January 2025, but it won't actually have effect on elections till 2026. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We've done that. Check out my previous commissioner in the cards on that. But once it gets signed, I'm sure, and once we get closer to 2025, I'm sure we'll be talking about it a lot. Another bill that I haven't talked about that passed at the end of session, A5874 S350. This actually requires people who are making constitutional challenges to go to one of 6 different courts. They're the highest population counties within a judicial district. And the reason the proponents who put this forward is that there was a lot of judge shopping that has been going on where, for example, the redistricting lawsuit, instead of going to Albany County, they went to Steuben County because it was more likely they were going to get a judge that was more favorable to their outcome there. At least that's what the proponents are saying. So this bill limits where you can file these constitutional challenges to the highest highest populated county within each judicial department, and there's 4 judicial departments. So it's so this is a bill that is waiting to be signed by the governor. Next one relates to the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act at A7431 S818. This adjusted some of the timelines about what's going into effect, making some of the provisions go into effect on July 1st, some of them actually going later. So still, this hasn't really started the New York John R. Lewis New York Voting Rights Act. A lot of this is predicated on the Attorney General saying that they have the staff to start it. And I don't believe that's happened yet. And this is mostly ministerial in nature, so I'm going to move on. The next one relates to the registration of voters during early voting, A6132 S5984A. This is the Golden Day bill. It took effect immediately. It's already been in effect. This basically says that anybody showing up on the 10th day before the election, which is the final day to register to vote, at any early voting center can vote by affidavit ballot, and it will count as their vote and their registration if they're not previously registered. So that is putting the Golden Day into effect, and it was in effect for this last election. Next one, A1565A S6519A. This establishes a deadline for changing the location of a polling place for early voting by requiring that no location change may occur within 48 hours of the commencement of the early voting period unless there is a disaster or declared a state of emergency. Seems like a common sense law. You don't want to be changing early voting designations. We have to set them in May, but sometimes, things have come up. But once you get into that 48-hour window, you can't move the bill if this bill, or the early voting center, if this bill is signed by the governor. Then another big bill that hasn't been talked about that much is A7632A S7394A. This establishes early voting by mail. Now, you may remember New York attempted to have no-fault absentee voting, and it failed on the constitutional amendment. This is another way to handle this, where they're going to allow people in the 40 days before the election to request an early vote by mail. Now, it's not the same as an absentee. You don't get a permanent one every year if you want it. But you don't need to do an excuse. You have to request it each and every year if you want to vote by mail. Obviously, we expect a court challenge to that. This will not go into effect until January 1st of 2024 once the governor signs it. So it's not for this year. If you're voting this year and you want to vote by absentee, you still have to have an excuse to vote by absentee this year. But if this is signed by the governor and passes constitutional muster, which I think it might, because the same thing was done in other states like Massachusetts and Pennsylvania that have limits on absentee ballot voting in their constitutions, and then they did this and it passed it. We will have to see if it passes. But if it does, then in essence, voting by mail will come to New York, but you have to request it each and every year. And then another controversial bill that was passed, A7760, S7564. This actually changed certain thresholds in the public campaign finance law that will be effective next year. It's actually in effect now, but the races are next year. It upped the small donor limit to $250 from $250 to a higher rate. Again, has not been signed by the governor. It also, clarified when a candidate is opposed by a competitive candidate requires a disclosure on political communications if you're in the public campaign finances. Next one is, make sure I didn't skip one. Right. Okay. A1177 and S6195. This relates to ballots submitted in envelopes that are sealed with tape, paste, or other binding agent. This will take effect immediately if and when the governor signs this. Right now, if a ballot has a tape or other sealing instrument on it other than licking the seal and closing it that way, those ballots do not count. They have to be cured. This would allow us to count these ballots unless there's obvious evidence of tampering. And then number 15, I'm not going to get into this one that much, is A7669, S7534. This increased the number of Supreme Court justices in each local district. So in certain local districts, so it's not everyone got an increase. So we'll have to see. And in fact, I'm looking at this in the 5th district, which is the one we're in, will not get an extra judge. There's a few districts that get an extra judge. There's other things in there where they relied to family court judges. And the number of family court judges as well. So this bill, if it gets signed by the governor, will add some more judges, which is needed because the civil courts and the judicial courts, the Supreme and family court, are very backed up in cases, and they need more judges to handle a lot of the backlog in these cases. But it's an election bill because it's adding elective offices. And then finally, A268 S587. This is a mandatory training curriculum for poll workers. This will have a mandatory training that is done by the State Board of Elections for a train-the-trainer program for how to train poll workers. Once it is passed, it'll be effective within 180 days, and the State Board of Elections will have to come up with a course, and then we will have to send people to those courses and change our training procedures for those. Another 28 bills passed either one house or the other. Not going to go into those because they're not law, but they may be law next time. And a lot of those bills were bills that were priorities of our Democratic caucus and also the Bipartisan Elections Commissioner Association. So, I think you heard me speak about a lot of these bills before, like the full-time commissioner, the 4-year term, and the staffing. Though all of those passed the Senate but didn't pass the Assembly. Sometimes bills pass one house a couple of times and then eventually get passed by both houses. So I'm not giving up on those bills. I don't think anybody is. It's disappointing that we didn't get some of these bills in right away, but I think part of that was also the late arriving of the budget. Hurt a lot of that. So that's all I got for Commissioner Nakar today. Enjoy Independence Day. This is the the founding of the principles of our country. We didn't really get founded until the Constitution was adopted many, many years later. But the Declaration of Independence that from New England was a formative, obviously, document in our country. I wish some of the original lines were not cut out of that, the lines that dealt with slavery and some of those other things. But there was a grand compromise to get to independence. And then once we got independence, then we had to work on our flaws as a country and continue to work on that, which is ongoing today. We are always striving towards a more perfect union. And that's why doing these election laws on Independence Day was good for me, because I thought, hey, there is progress being made. Not all progress will be made in one session. Not all progress will be made in 1 year. And we're continuing to make our country more perfect. As I said, I'm going to be trying to get back onto my content schedule. So on Thursday, I'll be releasing a Zoom with Zarni with Tom Keck. Speaking of trying to make a more perfect union, Tom is my go-to guy for the Supreme Court. Obviously, we had some huge Supreme Court cases that dropped on Friday. And Tom and I will be talking kind of a review of the term of the Supreme Court. We've been doing this twice a year, ever since 2020. And he's the best person I know in the area to talk about the Supreme Court, what these rulings mean, and what some of the scandals mean that are going on right now. And then this weekly wonk, I hope we'll get back on track this weekend. I will be doing my analysis of some of the statistics from the annual report that the Board of Elections opened up over the weekend. The 2022 annual report has a lot of stats that you've already seen in there, but there's some stats, especially about budget, that you don't see in my other weekly wonks, and this is the time I'm going to be talking about that. So I've already started working on that article, but it won't be out until Saturday or Sunday of next week. Again, I plan on getting back on my content schedule. Tuesdays, doing Commissioner Carr. Thursdays, Zoom with Zarni. And on the weekend, the weekly wonk. And, of course, any of the other things that I got going on. Later this month, I'll be going back down to D.C. I'm part of the local governing council for the Elections Assistance Commission. It's a federal government commission about, about how we run elections. I will go more into that in a future Commissioner in the Car. And of course, we're looking at closing up the primary later this month, and then going on to the hand count, and then we're going to start working at our main task for the Board of Elections for the next month or two. We'll be replacing all of our voting scanners to be in time for the general election, and I'll have more about that later on this month as well. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy your holiday. Bye-bye.